What's up guys, Asian here, got another build video, and today we're going to be discussing the Warden Healer. So this is going to be a build that kind of focuses in around the ability to use a Monster Helm set. So this is going to be a little bit different and played a little bit different from your typical healer build where you have two 5-piece sets set up at all times. This particular build is going to focus on bar swapping appropriately in order to get the most out of your two sets, because you won't have both of them active at once. On the flip side though, in return you get to use a Monster Helm set instead. So for this particular build, to be using Earthgore, but you can use other Monster Helms here with this build. So this definitely isn't a build that's going to be I would recommend a beginner healer using this. I would recommend this to a healer who knows what they're doing, who has a couple of vet trials under their belts, who wants to explore a little bit, you know, breaking out of that meta mold of having two 5-piece bonuses up at all times. So this is kind of the build centered around there. So this is going to play a little bit differently from your typical healer, especially typical Warden healer even. But you do get a nice boost from having that Monster Helm set active. So just like our other build videos, we're going over gear, our skill bars, we're going over CP point distributions, our race, attributes, food, things like that. We won't be talking about necessarily a rotation, because healers don't really have a rotation. You have a little bit more rotation than a tank, but you are still going to be fairly reactive and proactive when it comes to each fight, so you're not going to have necessarily a set rotation. Rather, you will have different priorities. So you're going to have skill priorities and things you want to maintain, things like that, instead of having a set skill rotation. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. We'll talk about our gear first. So like I said earlier, we are able to use a Monster Helm set with this build, which is pretty much kind of goes against kind of what you've been told about the healer meta, but this build is still very, very effective. So for our Monster Helm here, we're going with Earthgore. Earthgore comes from Bloodroot Forge, so you will need to have access to ESO Plus or Horns of the Reach DLCs in order to get this Monster Helm. Because we are using a Monster Helm, you can go with the heavy and medium pieces, so that's kind of the advantage of having the Monster Helm. You're able to use the 5-1-1 setup instead of having all your armor be light. So you can see here that we have a heavy helm and a medium shoulders here. So besides Earthgore, there are a couple of other Monster Helm sets you can use here. Earthgore is probably going to be the best, but you do have other options here. So let's quickly go into the Monster Helm sets. So you can use Chokethorn. That's not a bad Monster Helm set to use. You do get some additional Magicka regen. The only problem is that the proc, you don't really get to choose who it heals, so it could heal somebody at full health. So that's kind of the downside of using Chokethorn instead. You can go with Sentinel of Rakugams. So this drops from, I believe it is Dark Shades 1. So when you heal a friendly target, you basically are able to create a spider that heals and restores stamina to you and your allies. So this isn't necessarily going to be quite as useful as, let's say, Chokethorn or Earthgore. The heal is not quite as strong, and it does return stamina, which is nice, but it's only within 5 meters of yourself, so the only people who are really going to benefit from the stamina is really going to be your stamina DPS, and generally as a healer you won't be within range of your stamina DPS. So Sentinel of Rakugams isn't necessarily the best set to use here. Let's see, there's one more here. Bogdan and a Night Flame is another potential Monster Helm set you can use. So you get some additional Magicka here, so it makes your heals a little bit stronger, plus it gives you a little bit more resource pool. When you heal a friendly target, you have a 5% chance to summon a totem for 6 seconds that heals you and your allies within 5 meters for 646 health every 1 second. Well, this is, that's obviously going to be a little bit more, because this is kind of, I think this is level 1 stats. So this is actually not a bad set. It has very, very huge healing potential. So on a Warden healer where you don't have a lot of burst heals, Bogdan could be a very nice supplement to your heal over time. So it is something, another potential Monster Helm set to use here. Let me see, and that's pretty much it when it comes to Monster Helm. So you do have a couple of options there. Let me see if there's actually here's Engine Guardian's another potential set you can use. It's not quite as strong as the other sets that we've talked about. When using an ability, you have a 10% chance to summon a Dormer Automaton to restore health, stamina, or Magicka every half second for 6.5 seconds. The reason why I say it's not quite as strong is while it does help out your sustain, it's very random. So you could get health when you have full health, and you don't really need health, or you could get stamina when you have full stamina, and that just wastes the proc itself. Plus, the one piece effect is health regen, which isn't very useful on a healer. So Ancient Guardian's kind of one of those sets that's you might as well pass up for other sets, and that are also easier to obtain. Ancient Guardian comes from Darkshade Caverns too, so it's a lot harder to obtain. Bogdan comes from Elden Hollow 2. Chokethorn comes from Elden Hollow 1. So any of those sets are easier to obtain than Ancient Guardian comes from Darkshades 2, which is generally regarded to be a little bit more difficult of a dungeon to complete. For our first 5-piece set, so the way this build works is that you basically have you have two sets. So you still have two 5-piece sets, however you're only ever going to have one of them active at a time. So your front bar is going to have one set active, and then your back bar is going to have this other set active. So you're going to want to try to figure out which set you want on your front bar, which set you want on your back bar, which essentially boils down to which set do you want active on your healing bar, and which set do you want to have active on your destruction staff bar. So for our healing bar, so for our first 5-piece sets, obviously going to be Spell Power Cure. Spell Power Cure is a very, very powerful set. It is still the healer meta, and it has been ever since its release. So you definitely want to pick up Spell Power Cure. Now, I highly recommend having this as your healing set, so your Resto staff will be the Spell Power Cure, and then your Destro staff for this build, we're going to be using Master Architect instead as the other 5-piece effect. So you're going to want to have your Destruction staff. Lightning staff is preferred, but you can go with something like Ice for the Minor Aim instead. But Lightning staff is definitely better for that to help apply off balance. So that's going to be the second 5-piece set that we're using here. You don't necessarily need to use Master Architect. You can use any of the other sets here. So Mending is still an option, as well as the new light armor set, Jorvuld's Guidance from Scalecaller Peak. That's also not a bad set to use on your back bar, but if you are going to be using Jorvuld's Guidance, you are going to have to kind of play around a little bit with your ultimates, just because you want to have Warhorn on the bar that you have Jorvuld's Guidance active on, so that's something you want to keep in mind. Now, you don't necessarily need to use a Lightning Staff on your back bar. You can go with double Resto if you'd like. It's just Lightning Staff is generally going to be better because you will be the primary source of off balance for the group. The exception to this is if you do have a Magsorks in group, they might be using Lightning Walls, and so you might be able to use double Resto if you have Magsorks in group that are using a Lightning Wall. So that's something that's going to be variable, and it's kind of going to be dependent on your specific group, whether or not you have Magsorks running Lightning Walls or not. So for armor traits, we're going to be going with Infused on our large pieces, so that's our helm, chest, and legs with a Prismatic enchant, so that gives us max Magicka, health, and stamina. It's very nice to have that additional stamina plus that additional health, so in order to help our survivability as well as our ability to kind of avoid things. And our small pieces, we're sticking with Divines with max Magicka enchants. For our jewelry pieces, so you basically have two glyph options here. You can go with Magicka Regen, or you can go with Spell Damage, and that's all going to depend on your own healing style. So if you feel like you need more sustain, then you can go with more Magicka Regen glyphs. If you feel like you need stronger heals, then go with a Spell Damage glyphs instead. So here I have one Magicka Regen glyph and two Spell Damage glyphs. So I have stronger heals, and my sustain is going to take a little bit of a hit. However, as a healer, you will be heavy attacking very often, so you don't feel like you need to use two regen glyphs. Typically, one regen glyph is enough to help sustain you through all but the most resource-intensive fights. So just keep that in mind. You might want to carry around a second set of jewelry with Magicka regen glyphs for those resource-intensive fights, but generally speaking, one regen glyph is typically going to be enough. For our front bar here, for our Resto Staff bar, I have Decisive with a Weakening enchant, but you do have options when it comes to weapon traits. You can go with Infused to make your enchant stronger, go with Defending to give yourself a little bit more survivability, you can go with Power to give your heals more oomph behind them, or you can even go with Nirnhone for more spell damage, which in turn boosts the amount that you can heal. Kind of up to you how you want to play around with it. Because we're using Master Architect here, we're going with Decisive just because we're able to get our ultimate up faster, so we're able to use our Enchanted Growth ultimate more often, which helps gives our DPS more uptime on their Major Slayer buff. So that's kind of why we're going with Decisive here, but again, you can go with something like Infused, Defending, Powered, Nirnhoned. Those are all good choices. For our back bar, I have infused the weapon damage enchant. Again, you do have a couple of options with your back bar enchant. You can stick with powered for stronger heals, so you heal over times while you're on your back bar will still get a little bit of a boost. Nirnhone again for that weapon spell damage boost in order to get a little bit stronger heals. Go with charge, which isn't going to be very useful here if you're not using a shock damage enchant. It's only going to be useful if you're using a shock damage enchant. Charge is kind of a distant fourth. You can also go with defending to help out your survivability again. So again, you do have options with your weapon trait here, but I would stick with the weapon damage enchant just so you can give yourself a little bit stronger heal when that enchant procs. So that's pretty much it. Let's go over our character sheet. So I am a Dark Elf. Dark Elves generally are not going to be the number one option for a race when it comes to healing. The number one race right now, at least widely regarded by a lot of people, are going to be the Argonians, mainly because you get max health, max Magicka, plus you get some additional healing done. The potion passive is also very nice. Whenever you drink a potion, you manage to get all 3 resources back, so that helps out your sustain. So Argonians are generally regarded to be one of the best races for healing. A second option for a race is going to be Bretons. They have 10% max Magicka, some additional spell resistance, which helps out their survivability, and 3% reduction in costs of all their Magicka abilities, so they have some nice sustain boost. Ultima are also not a bad choice. You get 10% max Magicka, 9% Magicka regen, so you do get a little bit of sustain boost there. Dark Elves actually aren't terrible to get 9% additional Magicka, but that's pretty much the only thing they have going for them when it comes to healing. So, you know, you can play around with the race choice. It's not going to be that big of a difference. Being a support role is more about knowing how to play your role and knowing the fight mechanics, so you can even heal on, for example, a Khajiit or a Red Guard or an Imperial. So don't feel like you have to go with the meta races. You don't have to go with Argonians if you don't want to. For our attributes, I have 64 points into Magicka. However, you can shift a couple of points into health if you feel like you need additional survivability. Because healers, obviously staying alive for a healer is going to be a lot more important than, for example, a DPS. You're generally going to want to have a little bit more health than your typical 17k. A lot of people recommend 18k health minimum, so that's kind of what the threshold you should shoot for. So here I have 17.3k health. That's just because I'm a little bit more comfortable with healing, so I'm a little bit more comfortable having lower health. But if I do feel like I need the extra health, I will actually swap out food, because the lower health that I have here is actually due to the food that I'm using rather than my attributes. So you can still have 64 points into Magicka and still have 18k health. But again, if you can move a couple points into health if you would like. For our Mundus Stone, we're going with the Atronach. Now, you do have a couple of options for Mundus Stones. I'm going with Atronach in order to help out my sustain, but you don't need to go with Atronach if you don't want to. You can go with Thief for additional crit chance, so you get stronger crit heals, or you can go with the Ritual, which boosts how much you can heal. All 3 Mundus Stones are fair options to go for. I like the Atronach and the Ritual over the Thief. However, it's kind of up to you how you want to play around with it. If you feel like you need stronger heals, go with the Ritual, and then you can make up the regen using regen glyphs, for example. Or you can go with the Atronach and have better regen, and then trade off one of your regen glyphs on your jewelry for a spell damage glyph. So you can play around with that and see how you feel with how your healing style. So if you need more regen, go with Atronach. If you feel like you need more healing power, go with the Ritual. And for food here, I'm actually using Witch Mother's Potent Brew instead of the traditional Orzgar's Red Frothgar. So Witch Mother's Potent Brew gives us max Magicka, max health, and Magicka regen. Frothgar gives us more max health as well as more Magicka regen, but it doesn't give us max Magicka. So I'm going with the Witch Mother's Potent Brew here just for the additional Magicka. However, you don't need to use Witch Mother's Potent Brew. Orzgar's Red Frothgar is the typical go-to drink for healers. I don't think I have any on me. Let me go find it on the cooking fire real quick. Let's see here. Witch Mother's Potent Brew. I don't think I know it. Okay, I do not appear to know it, but Orzgar Red Frothgar gives you 5,000 additional health, and I believe it's 450 additional Magicka regen, so you're going to have a little bit more regen here. You'll have about 150 more regen. Where's regen? Right here, so you'll be close to 2,000, plus you'll get an additional 1,500 health, so your health will be sitting at around 19k or so. So Orzgar Red Frothgar is going to be more useful if you need more regen as well as more health, but I like Witchbinder's Potent Brew for that additional max Magicka that helps out the strength of our heals. Now for our skill bars. You do have a couple of flex spots here, so don't feel like you need to necessarily copy my skill bars, but there are going to be some skills that you're definitely going to want to maintain here. So the first skill we have is Dampen Magic, which is going to be our shield. Definitely want to have a shield. It helps out your swap ability by a butt ton. You definitely want to have your shield. And you're definitely going to want to have it on your healing bar, because this is the bar you're typically going to be sticking to. Healing Springs is a must. You need to have this on your bar. Combat Prayer, again, is a must for endgame content for that minor Berserk buff. So now this is going to be a flex spot here, Enchanted Growth. I have this here mainly for the minor Intellect and minor Endurance buff for DPS, which boosts their regen a little bit. But you do have a couple of options here when it comes to flex spots. You can go with Budding Seeds for basically an additional burst heal if you'd like. You can go with Leeching Vines for some minor lifesteal. Go with Lotus Blossom, so that way your heavy attacks will also heal people. You can go with something like Shimmering Shield if you are going against people who are using projectiles, so you can get major heroism and as well as a little bit of additional regen. You can go with something like Blood Altar, Sanguine Altar to have a mass application of minor lifesteal if you'd like. So you do have plenty of options here when it comes to this flex spot. You can even put Inner Light here for additional Magicka, as well as the I think it's 7% additional Magicka you'd get from the Inner Light. So that's another option too. So you definitely have a lot of wiggle room when it comes to flex spots here. You can even slot something like Structured Entropy if you'd like, so you have more health on your front bar. So you have plenty of options when it comes to your front bar. You can even do something like Quick Siphon or Siphon Spirit. You can go with Healing Ward or Ward Ally, or you can even go with Mutagen or Rapid Regen if you're doing 4-man content. So you have plenty of options. Fifth skill here is another must-have to have. It's going to be Energy Orbs. This is going to be one of your strongest heals, as well as it returns resources to your DPS, so definitely want to have Energy Orbs. And for our ultimate, we have Aggressive Warhorn. Don't necessarily need to use it for 4-man content. For trials, you definitely want to use Warhorn over Enchanted Growth. It's kind of up to you how you want to play around with it. If you're not going to be using Warhorn because you're doing 4-man content, then you can do something like the Northern Storm for the additional max Magicka. You can go with Light's Champion if you'd like for a cheap, quick heal. It's kind of up to you how you want to deal with that. Now for our back bar, this is going to be a Destro staff bar. You have a couple of flex spots here. Elemental Drain must have for the major breach as well as the minor Magicka steal. Blockade of Storms for the off balance. Blue Betty, again a must have for that additional regen. And this is your two flex spots here. So I have Ice Fortress here for the minor protection as well as the major resistance buffs, which you can give to you as well as 6 other allies around you, so that's very, very useful. Then I have Leeching Vines here, but again you can use any of the skills that I mentioned earlier when it comes to which skills you can put down here. So you can use something like Lotus Blossom, you can use Budding Seeds, you can use Shimmering Shield, you can use something like Polar Wind for an additional heal. It's not quite as useful on a healer here. So, you do have plenty of options when it comes to these two flex spots here. Then our primary ultimate here is going to be Enchanted Forest. You can go with the other morph, which is Healing Thicket if you'd like, which heals for a little bit more, but Enchanted Forest gives you ultimate back when you heal somebody under 50%. So it costs 90 ultimate, but if you manage to heal somebody with under 50% with this, it pretty much is a 70 ultimate cost. So if you remember, this is our Master Architect bar, so when you activate the forest, just make sure the two closest people to you are your DPS, so they get that major Slayer buff. Don't want to necessarily be giving it to a tank or your other healer, because that's obviously not going to be a very good use of that proc there. So that's something that you want to keep in mind there. Now for our champion points. We have 240 points to spread across each of the 3 different constellations. Starting off with our Thief CPs, I have 75 in Arcanist and Tenacity, which leaves 90 points, which you can split across the other nodes however you'd like. It kind of depends on what passives you want from each of the constellations. I have 31 to Shadow Ward, 20 into Tumbling, and 31 into Warlord. I like to take a balanced approach and just helps conserve stamina in those cases where I have to block cast or if I need to break free very often. For our blue CPs, I have 75 into Blessed and 81 into Elfborn. Now you can put all 100 points into here if you'd like. However, it's not that big of a deal because a lot of the blue CPs are centered around DPS, and obviously as a Magicka, as a healer, you're not necessarily going to want all those DPS kind of passives there. However, you do have to keep in mind you'll be using 19 points into Elfborn and 25 points into Blessed to get that additional 1%, so you gotta kinda have to ask yourself if it's worth putting in those points there when you can put them somewhere else. I have 33 into Staff Expert, 51 into Master at Arms here. Again, that's kind of up to you if you want to go 100, 100, and then put the rest into, kind of divide them up here if you'd like. It's really up to you. The most important thing is definitely to have at least 75 and 81 points into these two nodes. If you're not going with 75 and 81, then just go straight up to 100. For red CPs, I like to take a one-size-fits-most situations kind of distribution. Depending on the content you're running, you might need to redistribute accordingly. So, for example, if you're running that Maw, you're taking a lot more magical damage compared to physical damage, so you can pretty much get rid of all the points into Hardy and put them into Spell Shield or Elemental Defender or Ironclad. So that's kind of up to you if you want to do that, or if you want to stick to a more general approach where you don't need to necessarily swap out your CPs every time you run different content. I have 51 into Ironclad, 1 into Spell Shield, 44 into Thick Skin, 1 into Light Armor Focus, 56 into Hardy and Elemental Defender, and 31 into Bastion. So that's pretty much all of our gear setups. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about how you want to play your healer. So as a Warden healer, you don't necessarily have access to a burst heal. That's kind of where Earthgore comes into play. You do have a strong burst heal when it comes to Enchanted Growth if you want to use that, but it's not going to be as strong as necessarily, let's say, Breath of Life. The trade-off is, of course, with Enchanted Growth, you get to hit more than one person, so that is the benefit of that. So as a Warden healer, your primary heals are going to be coming from your Healing Springs, Combat Prayer, and Orbs. So those are going to be your 3 primary heals in endgame content. Definitely try to use Enchanted Growth if you're going to be using the skill for the additional regen buff that you give to your allies, as well as it's a pretty nice burst heal that can hit multiple people. You just have to be mindful of where you're positioning yourself, because it is, if you can see here, it is a conal effect here. You can see kind of that cone shape there. So you do have to be a little bit mindful of where you're positioning yourself. Ideally, the DPS are going to be doing a good enough job positioning themselves, so you don't have to worry about it. But it's still something you want to keep in mind there. So obviously, on your back bar, if you're using the setup that I have here, you're going to want to make sure to have at least 1 or 2 people with this. Try to hit your tank with this because it'll only apply minor lifesteal to enemies that hit people with Divines active, so try to hit your tank with it. Otherwise, you can use Sanguine Altar or Overflowing Altar. Do keep in mind that this does have a cast time associated with it, so this will apply minor lifesteal for you, so you can use this instead of the Vines move if you'd like. Again, always want to keep your Betty Netch up. That gives you your major sorcery buff as well as some additional regen. And if you're using Ice Fortress, definitely want to make sure to keep that up. That just gives you a lot more survivability with your major resistance buffs as well as minor protection. If you're going against the boss enemy, definitely keep up LE Drain on the enemy, on the boss itself. If you're going for ad pulls, you don't necessarily need to apply it to everything. You kind of want to apply it to a couple of mobs, probably the big target mobs. So for example, if you're doing something like Sanctum Ophidia or if you're in Archive, if there's overcharges in the pull, you want to target those with LE Drain, but you don't necessarily need to LE Drain everything, just because the more you LE Drain, the less heals you're giving out. So that's something you want to kind of balance out. I recommend LE draining the big targets and kind of leaving the small targets kind of alone. Kind of try to keep up Blockade as much as you can. Off balance isn't as important in Dragonbones as it was in previous patches because of the changes to the uptime. So it's not as important to maintain Blockade, but it is nice to have that little extra DPS as well as you don't necessarily get caught, losing that off-balance uptime because you don't have your Blockade down. Now, for 4-man content, I would recommend using Enchanted Growth, or if you're in content where you're going to be split up, definitely stick with Enchanted Growth to give Major Slayer to 2 additional DPS. However, in Trials, there's an argument for Warhorn being better than Enchanted Growth. Kind of up to you how you want to play around with it. Talk with your raid lead about it. Technically, you can keep up 100% Warhorn uptime with just 3 Warhorns, so if you have 2 tanks and 2 healers, then you can have 1 healer and 2 tanks run Warhorn, which allows you to use Enchanted Growth to give people Major Slayer, but that's something you're going to want to talk about with your raid lead. So if you are using Master Architect on your back bar, I would recommend talking with your raid lead for raids about using Enchanted Growth. If you're doing 4-man content, then you can just use Enchanted Growth and put something like Northern Storm on the front bar, because Warhorn's not as effective for 4-man content. So that's pretty much it for this video. The thing with support roles is, again, you don't have a set rotation, so it's a little bit harder to explain things like that, but hopefully you guys kind of get an idea of how to heal here. So let me know down in the comments if you have any questions about this build, if you want to know anything more about healing as a Warden. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, hope you found it informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.